Hey everybody, it's time again to recap the latest news from the PV industry, compiled by the American Solar Energy Society. I'm Jay Warmke with SolarPVTraining.com, and this is what's happening in the wonderful world of solar for the week of June 1st. All right, the latest data from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, or EIA, reveals that the mix of renewable energy sources produced over the first 3 months of 2025 provided nearly a third of the total U.S. electric generation. Utility-scale solar expanded by 43.9% in the first quarter of this year, while small-scale rooftop solar increased by 11% compared to the same period in 2024. The combination of utility-scale and small-scale solar increased by over one-third and was 6.8% of the total U.S. electric generation for this first quarter, up from 5.3% a year earlier. This means that energy generated from solar surpassed the output of the nation's hydroelectric plants, which was 5.7%, for the first time in our nation's history. New research by the University of Arkansas shows that even with an extreme ramping up of solar energy infrastructure, only a tiny fraction of agricultural land would likely be taken out of production by harvesting sunlight. Authors of the study mapped out the expansion of solar energy projects in the state of Arkansas and found that only 22,000 to 35,000 acres of farmland would be used for solar by the end of 2026. This accounts for about 0.2% of the state's total agricultural land. And even if solar grew to 15,000 megawatts of capacity, which is the same electrical capacity used within the state of Arkansas by all forms of energy, coal, natural gas, nuclear, and renewables, that would require about 137,000 acres from the total of 13.7 million acres of farmland within the state. That represents about 1% of the state's farmland. It should be noted that currently about 30 million acres in the U.S. is dedicated to growing corn for ethanol production. This represents about 40% of the entire corn crop. A 2021 study by NREL, the National Renewable Energies Lab, found that a transition of our nation's grid to renewable energy from wind and solar would require about a one-third of the land that is currently being used to produce corn for ethanol. A recent report from the International Energy Agency, or the IEA, has predicted that the demand will outpace supply for copper and lithium over the next 10 years as these critical minerals face high demand costs through the green energy transition. The Global Critical Minerals Outlook 2025 report has predicted rapidly increasing demand for copper could potentially lead to shortages. The agency projected that 30% supply shortfall of copper by 2035. Some of the reasons for this shortfall include declining ore grades, increasing costs, and fewer resource discoveries, as well as a lack of diversification in mining sources, and the long time it takes from the time ore is discovered to the time it actually becomes copper. According to media reports, it takes an average of 17 years from the time a deposit is discovered to the time that it is producing copper. The need to modernize the U.S. power grid is also being impeded by slow access to new electric transformers. Global supply chain disruptions continue to slow access to transformers that are critical to stabilizing power system voltages and efficiencies. Delivery of new transformers ordered today take up to 3 years, according to the National Association of Electrical Manufacturers, or NEMA. 5 years ago, the wait time was only 4 to 6 weeks. The U.S. system has 60 to 80 million transformers as of late 2024, and estimates are that the demand for transformers will increase 260% over the coming decade. NREL reported that about 55% of all residential transformers are at the end or near the end of their lives, with many over 40 years old. And 3 anti-solar bills in Texas appeared dead after failing to meet the state's deadline that would have otherwise allowed them to progress through the legislative process. Senate Bill 819 would have placed additional fees, permitting restrictions, mandated setbacks, and regulatory requirements on utility-scale wind and solar projects within the state of Texas. Despite significant opposition to the bill while in committee, the legislation passed the Texas Senate 22-9 last April. Other bills that passed the Senate sought to require that at least half of all the electrical generation within the state of Texas come from coal or natural gas. The 3 bills missed last Saturday's deadline for legislation passed in the Senate to clear through the committee votes in the House of Representatives, so these bills will not be considered by the House this year. And that's the news from the solar industry for this week. We'll see you next week.